didn't realise how transformational it could be for people in the long term, and how those kind of, how lives really can be turned around by finding that community and having the opportunity to sing your heart out once a week, basically, which is, as I say, incredibly cathartic and joyful experience that stays with you throughout the week.
Hi there, and welcome to This Is Why We Sing with me, James Sills. I'm a singing leader, a musician and an author, and I'm convinced about the transformative power of singing. And the idea of this podcast is to open up the conversation around singing and to explore how it can help us to lead happier, healthier and more fulfilling lives. Today's conversation is with Marie Benton, who's the founder and CEO of Choir with No Name, which is a UK-based charity that runs choirs for people affected by homelessness and marginalisation. I have a huge amount of respect for Marie, who I've got to know over the years through my involvement with the Liverpool Choir with No Name. I think Choir with No Name is a really remarkable organisation for many, many reasons. The singing is the glue that keeps people together in Choir with No Name. They have a very defined artistic vision, which is to sing fun, uplifting, soulful pop music. And members of Choir with No Name wear their choir t-shirts with pride. Their concerts are euphoric and joyful. And when Choir with No Name are able to sing again in person, and you're able to, if you're in the UK, I encourage you to go to one of their concerts. Their Christmas concerts in particular are legendary. In the conversation with Marie, we talk about the ripple effect, how that choir members might only be singing together for 2 hours a week, but actually this experience becomes a platform for something much more profound. It becomes a catalyst for change in their life, giving people confidence, improving their mental health, and it's really amazing to hear about this direct from Marie, who had the vision to set up Choir with No Name back in 2008. So here we are, recorded in lockdown, myself in North Wales, Marie in London. Here we go. So welcome to the podcast, Marie. I'm going to start by asking you the first question I always ask everybody, which is, what song is in your head right now?
It's I Want a Little Sugar in My Bowl by Nina Simone, which I've been having piano lessons and I'm learning to play the blues, basically. And so I have, I've been tackling that since last Friday. Well, no, hang on, Saturday, when I had my last lesson, basically, which is so fun. Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I wasn't familiar with that song, and I've just recorded another conversation with a podcast guest, and they chose that as their song to add to the playlist at the end.
How funny.
Yeah, great minds.
Like, it's blues, but it's not blues, because you sort of, I was listening to it last week, like one evening, and said to my piano teacher, like, oh, I'd quite like to try this one, because we hadn't done any blues. We've done bits of, other genres and stuff. And he was like, oh yeah, good idea. And then I didn't listen to it properly, and actually when you do listen to it properly, when you look at the chords, you think it's going to be a 12 bar, and it's not at all. There's all sorts of kind of like other bits that she's put in, basically. And it's also a category, he told me, called dirty blues, which is, so it's like suggestive early music where you weren't allowed, well, like women particularly weren't allowed to sing about sex, basically. So it's all kind of shrouded in metaphor.
Right. Well, do you know what? I've just seen the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which I really recommend, which is on Netflix. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of her songs, I think, that have that kind of, a kind of a secondary meaning. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
What I love to hear about this, Marie, is that you're kind of, continuing to nurture your own musicality and your musicianship, because obviously we're going to talk about Choir with No Name and the way that is supporting other people on their journeys, musical and otherwise. But it is really important, isn't it, to keep yourself topped up? It's
become more and more important this year, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's the best thing of lockdown for me has been learning piano. And I learned classically as a kid, and I didn't really get on with it very well. In fact, because I was a terrible sight reader, and I think if you learn classical piano and you're not a very good sight reader, it's just frightening. Like, there's so many things to read at once and all of that. So I didn't. So I kind of, kept it up because I needed a second instrument. I was a saxophone player, really, but I didn't really enjoy it. And then, but I've always really envied people who could just sit down and play a song, and I want to be able to do that. And I've made loads of progress, which is like really exciting. So yeah, it's good. It's really fun. one of the things I've realised over my life is that nurturing your own musicality and kind of thing is it's crucial, isn't it? Like if you're a person who, whatever you get your top ups from, basically, and for me it's music, like you need to keep that going or everything falls apart, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I went into teaching, and I remember I was just so determined that I would keep seeing myself as a musician first, and a musician that taught, and so I kept playing my trombone and singing and performing, and I felt that was really, really important, because it is very easy to fall into that role. If you're someone who is making things happen for other people and supporting other people, it's easy to neglect oneself. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. So you talked a little bit about your background now. I'm really quite interested in, about your kind of your musical journey, your singing journey, and what led you to the point in 2008 where you formed the first or you set up the first choir with no name rehearsal. So yeah, could you maybe talk us through a little bit about your musical and your singing background?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sang a lot at school. Like I was in the a couple of choirs at school, and had always really enjoyed it. But then I didn't quite realise how much I enjoyed it, I think, and I kind of let it slip, basically, when in my early 20s. But I was a saxophone player. I kind of did that professionally for a while. So I had moved to London to play in bands, basically. And through that time, I kind of carried on backing singing, basically, like, and sort of function band sort of stuff, basically. And then I answered an ad, like this was back in the days, pretty much pre-internet, where you answered ads in Loot for band members, basically. And there was an ad for altos and tenors wanted, because I had a search out on the word tenor because I played tenor sax. So anyway, altos and tenors wanted for a gospel choir, and I was like, oh, that sounds fun, I might audition for that. So I auditioned and got in, and then ended up getting into, we had quite a flaky choir director in that gospel choir who didn't turn up very much, and because I was a musician and I knew how to count stuff in and all that kind of stuff, like I sort of stepped into the breach quite a bit and discovered I was really good at it. So it was a kind of just sort of happened by chance to realise that I was a better choir director than I was a saxophone player, basically, and that I had a kind of natural ability, I guess, to be in that sort of leadership position in the singing, and really enjoyed that, basically. So I got better at it with gospel chops, basically, and that choir, and then a new and better gospel choir, basically. And at the same time, so I was still gigging on the saxophone, and I had then begun doing a day job in a homelessness charity, basically. So I kind of had those two
very different worlds by the sound of it.
Yeah, they were, and again, I think like you, like I was an okay saxophone player, but I wasn't a brilliant one, and making a living was challenging, I guess, like a kind of regular living. And so I'd kind of done various different, bits of jobs in the meantime. So I'd worked in record shops for a long time, and did other sort of various day jobs. And then I got into charity PR, like communications stuff, and found a bit of a niche, or a kind of, was doing all right with that as a day job, but I didn't want to let the music slip, like you say. So they didn't feel, I don't know, I kind of had two concurrent careers, I guess, for a while, basically.
Yeah, running parallel.
I still have, really, yeah. Like, I still feel, even though I can do both of those careers within the same organisation now, like being a choir director is a very different thing to being a chief exec sort of thing. So, it's...
Do you know what I always say? We have to wear multiple hats, don't we? Those of us who are working in the arts and as musicians, and now especially so, but that's a lot of hats. Yeah. That's I think that's one of the things that keeps you interested as well, isn't it? It's kind of course,
yeah,
good. Exactly. So you're kind of setting the scene really well here for the formation of the first kind of happening of Choir with No Name, which I believe was back in 2008. Is that right? March
the 31st, 2008. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Etched in your brain. Could you tell us a little bit about that first evening? What your motivation to set this up, and what actually happened in the room that evening?
Absolutely, yeah. The motivation to set it up came from, I'd had the idea, and I'd discussed it with a few colleagues at the homelessness charity I was working at, and people seemed to think it was a good idea. There wasn't a lot else going on in London, in that kind of, mainstream pop sort of choir world, basically. And and also you can just see, like, working directly with homeless people, you can see the a lot of the problem for people sometimes is that kind of lack of community that you get from being in a choir. So it kind of felt like it made a lot of sense. And then I had done a bit of voluntary work with a theatre company who had got a space in King's Cross, and I mentioned to the guy that ran that I'd had this idea, and he said I could use the space for free. And at that point, that was the real catalyst, because at that point I had no excuse not to, if you know what I mean. Like, if I hadn't done it at that point, I would have felt really guilty, because I had all of the tools at my disposal to be able to get it going. So you know, we pulled in favours, basically. Like, a couple of friends from the homelessness charity came to cook dinner that evening. Another friend came to play the piano. Someone else another friend had designed the poster for it, you know, all that kind of stuff. And we advertised in all the sort of hostels and day centres we had links with, and there were 4 people turned up that first evening. And so we had like 3 volunteers, me and 4 choir members, and it was really lovely. Like, it was so intimate because it was so small, basically.
Yeah.
But, you know, so we sang through a lot of stuff that so I had a few things prepared, and then people would, like, it was very informal. Like, people would kind of mention a song that they liked, and we'd sing through a verse and a chorus of it, sort of thing, just to kind of get people talking to each other and talking about music a little bit. So there was some Bob Marley, there was probably some Beatles, you know, that kind of, you know,
classic
that sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. And then we had some pasta and dolmio sauce for tea, if I remember rightly, basically afterwards, and everyone went home happy. And then the following week there was 8 people, and then it, you know, grew from there, basically.
Fantastic. And then, you know, you've grown to 4 choirs now, and kind of sister partner choirs, which we'll come to talk about. But it seems that the format of that first evening has remained relatively unchanged. Is that right? You know, kind of singing together, the type of songs that you sing together, and then eating together. And it seems to me a real kind of winning format. And I know, because I've had the privilege of leading your Liverpool choir. It's the exact format we use for our Wrexham One Love choir. So why do you think that, you know, you really hit upon something, I think, in that first rehearsal, something that was much more about than just singing songs together? So could you maybe talk through that a little bit?
I think that was, if I'm totally honest, it was more by luck than design, really, like in the first instance, and it just felt like the natural thing to do. And I think one of the things that we've tried to uphold at Choir With No Name, which actually in the new strategy that we're developing now is becoming even more important, is that we're not is that we're getting together as a team and enjoying music together, rather than kind of dishing out a service to the homeless, in inverted commas. I hate that expression, if you know what I mean. So what would you do if you got to go with a group of your mates to have a sing, sort of thing? You'd have a sing, and then you'd probably have something to eat together. Like it's and as I say, it wasn't something that we necessarily. I think possibly if I'd worked in homelessness services longer, it might have been slightly more formal than that, which would have been a shame, because it gives us that informal setting, and the fact that you're there to bond over something as joyous as music, like, gives you the opportunity to break down barriers a little bit, basically, and to just, you know, treat people as individuals and not as people in need, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely, as I say, it's something. So we're just launching this new strategy, basically, and one of the things that we're doing under that is it's very much about breaking down barriers, and one of the things that we want to do is mix is launch. We've got a couple of pilots to run this year, as long as COVID allows us to, which is where we remove the kind of, like, we've tended to have choir members, in inverted commas, which is people who've got, you know, experience of homelessness or other challenges going on, and then volunteers, who are anybody who wants to come and help out. And we're going to remove those labels, basically, and just have everybody being choir members, and that if there are tasks that need fulfilling to keep the choir running, that there's a volunteer committee, like you get in community choirs up and down the country, basically, and that choir members with and without lived experience of homelessness fulfil that committee, basically. So it's going to be more empowering for some people, and people who don't want to participate in that don't have to, sort of thing, but that it breaks down those barriers a bit more.
I really like that. And because also you have incredible loyalty from lots of your choir members, who maybe once they've been singing with you for years and years, you know, might, you know, feel like, you know, that they perhaps have even more ownership of their position than someone who comes in as a volunteer, who might have, you know, there might be, you know, kind of an undercurrent that's a different, maybe even more of an elevated position, and that feels like a real leveler, what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly the word I've been using about it, actually, and I think the word ownership is really apt, isn't it? Like, as you know, with Choir of No Name members, there's definitely a real sense of ownership, that people feel real pride in their choir and in what they've achieved together, basically. And I think that if we can add the sort of extra responsibility, really, for kind of keeping it going, then that's only going to increase, and cause, it's going to be I think transitioning our existing choirs will be quite challenging, because people are used to a status quo, aren't they, and kind of used to things being a certain way. So that's why we're trying it out in new ones before we adapt anything or change anything in the ones that we've already got.
Fantastic. You've kind of hinted at this about why singing, but why was it singing? Why wasn't it, let's do like a yoga class for people who've experienced homelessness, or why was it not like a creative writing class or whatever? What is it about the singing experience? And again, you've kind of alluded to this already, but why singing? And because singing and homelessness is not two things that people would naturally put together, right?
Yeah. I think, in the first instance, it was because it's what I knew, if you know what I mean. So it's what I knew how to do, and I really could really recognise how cathartic it is, how you can go into a rehearsal feeling like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and then leave after just an hour or so feeling elated, like completely different. Like, it's such a transformational experience in the moment. And what I didn't realise at that time, if I'm totally honest, and again, this is a kind of happy, more by luck than design sort of thing, like, I was quite naive, I think, when I went into it, and I understood that the community that you can feel by being part of a choir, and I understood that kind of transformation that can happen in rehearsal itself, but I didn't realise how transformational it could be for people in the long term, and how those kind of, how lives really can be turned around by finding that community and having the opportunity to sing your heart out once a week, basically, right. Which is, as I say, incredibly cathartic and joyful experience that stays with you throughout the week.
And it has that ripple effect. It's not just about the hour that you're in the room that you're singing. You regularly survey your members, and I've just got some stats here from 2018. These are some that I included in my book, actually, because I just thought they were so powerful. 96% of members said that through the choirs they made new friendships. 76% reported improved mental health. 93% have improved in confidence. That is amazing. That is an amazing service that Choir of No Name is providing there. It's
we're really proud of those stats, and they consistently remain there, year on year. It's been interesting to see what's happened. We didn't do the same survey this year because of COVID, so we've been, as we all have, we've been singing online and that sort of thing. So we asked some slightly different questions this year. But yeah, it is, as I say, like what those stats don't capture, and one of the things that we want to do is why, if you know what I mean. Like, what is it about that experience? What is it about singing that can be really, truly transformational for people, and not just in terms of... I think one of the stats that we talk about is about people kind of feeling motivated to try new things outside of choir and moving into, sort of more positive situations in their housing or employment or volunteering or kind of whatever their aspirations might be. And a lot of people will attribute that positive change to their time at choir, basically. And so what we want to do this year, in the next couple, is commission some sort of clever researchers, like not just us asking questions, but some people who really know about how to conduct research, qualitative research with individuals, basically, to explore that internal journey for people. Like, what was the point? At what point did their motivation pick up, and why did it? And what was it about that experience that led to, X, Y, or Z, basically? Because it's really interesting, and not something that I think we fully understand yet.
Exactly, and that's partly my motivation for having these conversations and setting up this podcast, because we talk about that ripple effect, and just the people who come to your choirs, they are taken on such an incredible journey, and it's not it's not necessarily a musical journey. Like the objective of Choir of No Name isn't to turn people into kind of, pop stars, is it? It's to install all those things that we're talking about confidence and, making them motivated and all that kind of thing. And actually, that does come across. What I think is really amazing about Choir with No Name performances is that your ambassadors will always speak, and they'll tell the audience a little bit about their journey and about their story. And I think those are always incredibly powerful. And I guess that's the kind of thing that you're trying to harness and understand in your research.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And actually, exactly that. And I'm not quite sure what the parameters of the research will be yet. I kind of feel like we need help to even get to what the questions are, if you know what I mean. But,
Sure.
but that's the kind of our plan. Have you come across Shelley Coyne, James?
No.
Who she's a choir director as well. She works up in Glasgow, and she's done a PhD in sort of music and homelessness, basically. And she specifically looked at young people listening to music and their choices of music that they listen to and how it makes them feel and all that sort of stuff. But she did, as part of it, she did a big study on singing and homeless singing groups, basically. So the PhD was just released this year, basically. Just released? You don't really. What do you do with a PhD? You publish it, not
Launch.
release it.
It dropped.
Exactly. Yeah.
My PhD. Just dropped my new PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'll forward you the link anyway. It's,
cool.
It's good.
Because were you aware of similar projects? When you were launching? Because I've since become aware of the Choir of Hard Knocks. Is it called in Australia?
Yeah. So I had a chat with Jonathan Welch, who was the director behind that before I set up. Actually, he was incredibly sweet and supportive, and I also had called Matt Peacock, who was at that time running Streetwise Opera, basically, who do
in the UK.
similar stuff. Yeah, in the UK. And I think they were the only people I'd spoken to. Yeah, as I say, Jonathan in Australia was incredibly supportive. Matt was, and Matt was as well, actually. And kind of like we had to feel our way around each other a little bit because we didn't want to tread on any toes, basically. But we were doing such different stuff.
You're in a different hemisphere.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. I think it was. Once Matt understood that, it's all been completely fine, and they have been incredibly supportive. And we try to, even though we are in different hemispheres, we sort of try and keep in regular conversation so that we're working together rather than against each other, which is a pitfall that lots of charities can fall into, I think.
Of course, yeah, of course. I mean, but also I think that the remit of Choir with No Name, like musically, is really, really tight. Like you're very, very kind of focused about the type of songs we do. Like this is the vibe we're going for. Yeah. Which is basically like 110% joy as far as I can see. Like it seems to me that song choice is really important to you and to the musical directors and to the members.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's something that we write into. So we write a manual for choir directors, basically, and that's kind of and that's one of the things that we talk about, uplifting pop, basically. And it's and yes, it is. It's really important. What we were very determined not to be was an organisation that soul searched about homelessness issues. Basically, that we were going to do the opposite of that. And I think, well, funnily enough, I've been talking about this quite a bit recently with one of our trustees, who's also an experienced choir director, because she was saying, well, you need to articulate this artistic vision to keep it pure, because if you were to move on, blah blah blah. And I'm like, but we don't have an artistic vision, we just like sing like fun pop songs. And she's like, that is the artistic vision. Right. Basically,
exactly.
That's like it doesn't matter, because I think I'm not I sort of particularly being a pop musician, like I wasn't even a jazz musician in the kind of like I came from a very, what I felt was kind of uncultured musical background, if you know what I mean. And actually, having had lots more chats about diversity and inclusion and all that sort of stuff, she's very kind of like, that doesn't, just because your perception of something means it's not highbrow, that doesn't mean that it's not absolutely valid, basically. And
there's a real purity about the joyfulness of kind of pop. There's nothing to be ashamed of, Marie.
No, that's what I've come to realise, which is fantastic, actually. And it's accessible. That was one of the other things that was important about it, was that lots of people already knew a lot of the songs, which brings people in. I think we have got some work to do on the way that we make sure everybody can be equally included in rehearsals. Because I think if you sing in English, then that automatically can exclude, some people, basically. And I've been. I'm hoping to have. That reminds me, I need to get back to him. I'm hoping to have a chat with a guy who did some work for us many years ago, actually, but who's got this incredibly inclusive style of choir directing, which is so really beautiful. It's a guy called Guillermo Rosenthaler. I'm never going to pronounce his name right. Argentine guy who just he creates arrangements on the spot with ideas from the choir members who kind of right there and then, and he's like, it's just and very non-language based basically. So I think, but yeah, just really sort of inspiring way of working. Yeah, like very, as I say, like kind of more inclusive than a very sort of top down approach, which is how choir directing is, traditionally dished out, isn't it? That's what we all do.
One of the things I really love about the way Choir with No Name works as well is the approach to performance, because a lot of people will think, a typical choir performance, the audience file in, the lights go down, the stage is lit and the choir sings songs for 2 hours and the audience clap and everyone goes home. Could you maybe talk through what a typical Choir with No Name performance might look and sound like in terms of that kind of audience-performer relationship?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we take it for granted now, but we have, again, like, the manual is written and mentions audience participation as a really important thing. And it stemmed from, again, it was something that grew quite naturally in the first instance. I think like a lot of our songs lend themselves to some audience participation, but we kind of quickly realised that it's another way of breaking down barriers, isn't it? It's another way of saying, like, you're part of this with us. You're not, you're not the them and we're not the, we're not the them and you're not the us, or, whatever it is. And so as an example, when we do our Christmas sing-alongs, which are kind of full of audience participation, basically.
Legendary Christmas sing-alongs, I should say. Legendary.
Each choir director is tasked with, like, the format will be that each choir gets 2 songs and the choir director has to include significant audience participation in one of those 2 choices, basically. And then at either end of that, they will be bookended with the kind of classic Christmas ones that everybody sings all together, like Slade or Streak and Stevens or whatever, that the audience will be singing all the way through with us as well. And it, as I say, it tends to be like the gig will start with everybody having to do a warm up with one of the choir directors. So everybody's on their feet doing a warm up, like including the audience basically, and then they kind of continue in that vein, I guess, and so by the end of it, everybody's on their feet waving their arms in the air, basically, and that's more fun, I think.
It's fantastic, and what you're doing in the first few moments, of a Choir with No Name performance is what, you go to, like, go and see like a stadium rock gig or whatever, and what the band's trying to do for the whole 2 hours is to get the audience to that point where everyone feels liberated to sing and clap or whatever. But you've just gone straight in there from the off.
And that's exactly it. And you kind of have to, like, you have to be brazen about the way that you approach it. Like, so basically, and to get people to warm up, they can't do that in their seats because it's like slightly sort of weird and awkward. So you start off by getting everybody to stand up, basically, and then people instantly feel more liberated, I think, as a result of that, basically. And they've been made to feel slightly silly in front of their friends that they've come with, which is exactly what it's all about, isn't it? Basically, like kind of freeing your inhibitions a little bit, basically.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the music as well, because, I think as an organisation who, you are running choirs for people who have experienced homelessness and other forms of marginalisation, you actually have really high musical aspirations for your singers as well. I'm just thinking back to the Christmas concert that I did with you guys several years ago. We had a whole live band on stage. We had a whole, we had a brass section. So this is like a full-on musical experience for everybody. The choir members are given the opportunity to sing solos. Standing up in front of hundreds of people. This isn't just let's get together and sing some songs and have a nice time. There's a real musical integrity to what you do as well. Like, could you talk about that a little bit as well, please?
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. And actually, the word integrity is one of our values, and is one of our organisational values, and it used to be excellence. So it's sort of morphed into integrity, but it means the same thing to us. Like, just because people have a homelessness background, it doesn't mean that they don't deserve the best in the accompaniment that you can give them, basically. And my feeling about that was that if you give people a solid musical platform to stand on, like, not just solid but exceptional, then obviously it's going to bring out the best in them as well, basically. When I used to run the first choir, we used to rehearse with a 3-piece band every week, like piano, bass and drums, and it just hasn't been practical to replicate that everywhere or whatever, and so it's become a kind of piano accompaniment during rehearsals, and then and then full band for gigs sort of thing. But the what we never compromised on was the quality of our accompaniment, basically. So if you've got your musicians that are accompanying need to be really good, basically, because otherwise everything falls over, doesn't it? You need someone who can play in time and play the right groove and play the, like, so if you're singing Blame It on the Boogie, you don't want someone who just sort of fluffs all the notes and kind of, because then people aren't going to be able to find theirs or whatever. So it's important.
And that thing of why shouldn't we have really high musical aspirations for the people who are singing with us? Like, just because people are coming from a background of homelessness or marginalisation doesn't mean that it shouldn't be awesome, and give people the best experience.
And the solos, I think, are really incredibly important for people sometimes, and people can really kind of, find reserves of courage that they didn't know that they had, I think, which can be really, really incredible. And our approach to that is to do it, is to take it from a kind of egalitarian perspective. So we're not just giving solos to the people with the loveliest voices, but that everybody gets a chance to have a go. But within that, you find the right voice for the right part, and the kind of so there might be a part that's kind of slightly more spoken feeling that would be great for somebody, or so everybody works to their strengths. And what we found over the years, which is really lovely to see, and I think another one of the things that make gigs so precious, really, is that kind of like groundswell of support from the choir for the soloists, basically, which is just like without exception really really incredible and really moving as well. And I think that if we're thinking about this kind of new model where we remove the distinction between choir members and volunteers and instead everybody's in it together, then a lot of the kind of more I guess people from sort of more reserved middle class backgrounds basically are going to be really supported by the rest of that choir as well. And so you're going to get this kind of thing where everybody's learning from each other, basically, and where those relationships are going to be really important.
And then that just goes back to kind of confidence, doesn't it? The confidence that you might get from singing like a verse in a song, can then just carry you through in so many other areas of your life as well. I think it's really hard to see the ramifications of that, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, well, pride is a really, really powerful emotion, isn't it? I think if you're feeling proud of something that you've achieved that week, then it definitely carries through into everything else that you're doing.
Exactly, like you learning your Nina Simone song.
Yeah,
we all need it.
It's buoying me up at the moment.
Yeah,
definitely.
Exactly. We've talked a little bit about the challenges of lockdown. That I know all too well as a choir leader myself.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that you kind of really got stuck in early on, not just to running online sessions, but also supporting members in other ways. Could you talk a little bit about that, Marie?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Zoom stuff, we were very inspired by you as well, James, and your kind of very early uptake of that platform, basically, and learnt a lot from you in that as well.
Well, a bit like you with your first choir in the name rehearsal, I had no idea what I was doing. I just said I was going to do it, and I did it, and it was wonderful, and then I had to try and work out how to keep on replicating that. But thank you. We were all just doing what we could in those early days.
Yeah, and actually, I'm all for just getting on with something and seeing what happes. Basically, it's often the best way to learn, I think. But yeah, the choir directors have all adapted to that, and then in the meantime, we kind of mobilised our teams of volunteers in the first lockdown to do weekly phone calls for our choir members. So everybody who wanted to hear from us was hearing from us once a week on the phone, and the choir managers were busy kind of hooking people up with their local mutual aid groups, making sure everybody got access to food. And now that I've talked about this more, I kind of recognise. So another one of our organisational values is family, because that's often the way that choir members describe their choir is as their family, and that's what families everywhere were doing. Basically, it was like calling each other, making sure that they were okay, they'd got somewhere to stay, they'd got some food, they'd got enough food, they'd got access to medicine, blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff, basically. So that's what that's what we were doing too. And
incredible.
It's been, and the other thing we realised was that only about a quarter of our choir members were able to get online when we were first doing the Zoom rehearsals. So we kind of launched a digital inclusion drive, got some funding in from Comic Relief and the lottery actually to get devices and data out to people, and now we're in the phase where we're sort of making sure that everybody's got the skills and training that they need to be able to access all the stuff online that they want to be able to access.
Fantastic. And you're musical directors have been, doing an amazing job. I'd just like to, 'cause I know all of your musical directors and I think they're all amazing. When you're looking to recruit choir directors, this is a very, very specific organisation. It's a very specific approach, isn't it? And I just wonder, were you looking for people who kind of had experience of working with groups like this, who had good musical skills, or were you looking for, kind of top choir directors who might be able to mould into the role? Or I don't know. I wonder if
we've always prioritised. We've always prioritised personality, I guess is the wrong way of looking at it. What the kind of crucial element of a choir with no name choir director. Actually, there's a few, but you need people who are able to make people feel good about themselves, basically,
right,
and who are kind of able to hold that space and hold a room and really generate, an inspiring atmosphere and keep people wanting to come back, basically. And that was more important to me than having an experienced choir director. Although the caveat to that is that they did need to be an experienced musician, basically. So you need somebody who understands music and its power, who can talk a musical language that other people understand, basically, but who've got that excellence as well, who can drive people to sort of achieving great things, basically. And sometimes that's a kind of sometimes that's a kind of music graduate, really highly trained musician, and sometimes it's a less trained but still a skilled person, if you know what I mean. But it's so yeah, we try and be a bit kind of open-minded about that. And actually, as we look at our kind of inclusion and diversity journey, it may well be that we broaden that even further, but that we don't lose sight of that. Excellence in performance and inspiring ability to make people feel great, basically.
Amazing. That as you were saying that, I remember that last time I saw you in London, which was just before lockdown, we were planning a choir leaders weekend away, weren't we?
We were, absolutely.
So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to that, when we can do that again, and we can all hopefully inspire each other a little bit, because I think that starting point that you mentioned about they have to be able to, inspire people, and they have to, people skills basically are at front of the queue. Yes,
yeah, exactly that. Yeah, I can't wait for that weekend, James. It's been a long year, hasn't it? But I mean, they absolutely are, and particularly when you're working with people who've been through really tough times, you need a certain amount of empathy, don't you, to be able to kind of understand why some of the challenges that you get within the rehearsal space might be slightly different to if you were at a choir of more sort of, what do you get? What's the word? I'm going to say more normal in inverted choir. Commas. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked a little bit about your kind of hopes and aspirations for the future. It sounds really exciting. Like you never seem to be a charity that's kind of stood still. Like what are your kind of aspirations now, either musically or kind of more broadly for Choir with No Name?
I think and it's all sort of spelled out, as I say, by this new strategy, which has got two. I guess there's the kind of mixing the community a little bit, and then co-production, basically, like kind of asking our choir members to take on more responsibility for delivering the choir, and that, if you look at co-production properly, and we're still working out what this means for us. I've got absolutely no idea, to be honest, but if you look at it properly, then it's going to be people with lived experience of homelessness involved in running every single aspect of what we do, from the singing itself to organising gigs, to fundraising, to everything, basically. So that's, as I say, something that we're kind of going to be working out over the next few years. And musically, I think just addressing some of these issues of inclusion, I think, is really important. So looking at how we include people who don't have English as a first language, or possibly looking at how we make sure that we're accessible to, just as an example, somebody who might be going through gender transition and their voice is changing, all that kind of like making sure we can accommodate everyone, basically. Sure. and that we are representing the homeless communities that we serve, basically. Musically, I think I'm quite keen, now that I've had this revelation that uplifting pop is a valid artistic vision. I think I really want to articulate that and explore it a bit more with our team. and think about how arrangements get written and whether that can be more participatory and like have a think about that sort of stuff. But I think that vision to us, or that kind of purity of music choice, is quite important to who we are. It's definitely a part of our brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I felt that to a degree with the Sofa Singers as well, because there's so much, so many songs you could sing, so many approaches you could have. And I think actually sometimes laying out your parameters is really important. But also, I don't know, I just feel over the last year in particular, there's just been a real joy, in things that I wouldn't say we'd been embarrassed about before, but, it kind of just made us smell the roses a little bit. And it's like, do you know what? If I'm just want to listen to Kylie all day and get my glitter on and have a great time, then that's what I need to do, because that's going to lift my spirit. And,
absolutely,
because there's enough cynicism out there, and there's enough, I'm not bothered about, whether it's cool or not. I mean, let's just get on with it. Life's,
I think that's
life's for
absolutely
living.
Right. I think Kylie became cool when I just can't get you out of my head. I think Kylie became cool at that point anyway. It's like totally okay to dance to Kylie.
It's fine to dance to Kylie, yeah. That's true. It's very true. So talking about songs then, we have a podcast playlist. I ask every guest to add a song or some kind of vocal performance to that list. It's wide open, but it's something that you'd like the listeners to listen to and enjoy.
I am going to go with still Nina Simone.
Brilliant.
But I'm going to go with Love Me or Leave Me, which has got like the kind of, and the vocal. I mean, her vocal performance is always just so interesting, like really unusual. She's got such an unusual voice. I think it's so worth listening to. But the piano solo is like out of this world.
Is it one of her kind of like Bach 2-part inventions?
Yeah, exactly. Like
is
it's total. She goes full classical on it, and the band is still swinging underneath. Like it's slightly mental, and then it comes in, and then when the vocal comes back in, it's like the total climax of the song. It's just like she's kind of and then she lands it. Like it's just brilliant. It's really good.
She's incredible. Like the hairs on my arms just going up was thinking about it, because there are so many of those songs where in the middle, the band are still swinging away in the background and she's playing these really delicate, kind of fugues, and then suddenly she lands back in again. She's just incredible.
Yeah.
She's just incredible. Thank you. Well, that will give me an excuse to go and listen to that straight after this conversation. So finally, Marie, we've talked so much about the power of singing today, but if a life of singing has taught you anything, taught you a life lesson, what would it be?
I think I kind of had an idea for this earlier, and it's sort of slightly muddied. Anyway, I think what it would be is that music and singing in particular is such a leveller. Like you can, like we do quite a few corporate workshops, and you get the chief exec of the company standing next to the person who runs the mailroom or whatever, and the chief exec is probably, because of their position, the person who is more inhibited basically, and that all of us should approach music and singing in a way, or if we could all approach music and singing and possibly the rest of life in a way where you had as few inhibitions as possible, in the right context, obviously, then it does you no harm, basically. Like it's nobody's going to think less of you because you're singing your heart out. Basically, it's in fact the opposite, really.
Brilliant.
And it's just so nourishing to not care and to go for it.
Love that. Not care and just go for it. That's a brilliant way to end. Thanks so much, Marie. It's been a real joy, and thanks for the amazing, important work that you continue to do.
No, thank you for having me.
Some great life lessons there from Marie Benton of Choir with No Name. Thanks again so much to Marie for appearing on the podcast. If you want to find out more about Choir with No Name, go to the show notes and you'll find a link to the website where you can find out a bit more about the organisation. You can find out how you can donate and support their work. And there's also information about the 4 choirs they run in the UK. Currently in Brighton, in London, in Birmingham and in Liverpool. And those of you who are familiar with the Sofa Singers might be interested to know that Mersey Wiley, is the musical director of their Liverpool choir. Also in the show notes, there's a link to their video, This Is Me, which features members from across all of their choirs. and there's also an article about the Choir with No Name. Also in the conversation I mentioned the Wrexham One Love Choir, which, with Marie and Choir with No Name support, I helped set up a few years ago, and that's a choir for people in North Wales, for people who've experienced homelessness and other forms of marginalisation. And again, there's a link to information about that choir in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on the podcast, and you really can help me spread the good news about singing in just a couple of ways. You can share this podcast with a friend or family member or anybody who you think might be interested in it. That really helps get the word out. And you can also rate and review on iTunes if that's where you listen to your podcast, because that will help make the podcast more visible to other people. Help me spread the good word about singing. And until next time, thanks again for joining me. Take care.